They said the Ervik cubs would bolt from anything taller than a utility cart and scream if you made direct eye contact. So when 3 downy, 6-limbed fuzzballs barreled past armored keepers to climb my trouser leg and make camp under my lab coat like I was a mobile den, the entire nursery stopped breathing at once. I froze because claws had found my belt loops, and also because every lens in the observation gallery had swung to me. The keepers, tall, antlered Sarn with ceremonial scarves and shockwands, stared through their faceplates as if I had casually strolled into a volcano and offered it tea. One hissed, "Human Mara, do not move," while another whispered, "By the first brood, they've chosen her." Chosen was a dramatic word for being used as furniture. The cubs chirred and pressed their foreheads against my ribs, breathing in fast puffs. Their fur smelled like cold iron and baked grain. One paw patted my name badge as if checking for a pulse. I kept my hands out to the sides, palms open, non-threatening, like we practiced for fieldwork. "Hi," I murmured to the little tornadoes, and one trilled back as though we'd agreed on the terms of a truce. Dr. KSCL, the chief xenopsychologist, descended from the gallery in a cascade of robes and indignation. "Explain this," they said, cresting and flattening. "We have followed every human protocol. No scented detergents, no direct stares, no, why are they not terrified of you?" I brushed my teeth. Humor is a reflex when my heart spikes. The gallery tittered and then went silent as one cub poked its blunt snout from the coat fold to squint at KSCL. "Back!" KSCL ordered, palms high. "Do not crowd her. Do not crowd them." They pivoted to me. "Mara-chan, you are now the center of the universe. Try not to sneeze." I shifted to keep blood in my feet. Cubs are heavier than they look. Each motion set off contented peeps that trembled through my bones. This was supposed to be a controlled demonstration. Instead, the cubs had made a unilateral decision. The Sarn's agreement with the Ervik Protectorate, thin after a mining dispute, required proof they could care for displaced young without imprinting errors. A failure here could mean the Protectorate recalled the cubs and tore up the corridor guarantees, taking with them the one thing keeping the frontier from sliding into skirmishes. Nobody said that out loud, but the tension tasted like ozone. I lowered to a sit so the cubs wouldn't dangle like accessories. The smallest slid down, made a little circle, then bumped my knee with its head in ritualized gratitude. "You're welcome," I whispered, earning KSCL's incredulous look, as if gratitude exchanges required a quorum. KSCL flicked their wrist. A soft drone hummed, sampling air chemistry. "Did you ingest any Ervik compounds recently?" "Just coffee," I said. "And a nutritional brick from the human galley, which tastes like coffee had a fight with drywall." "Coffee," KSCL repeated like a curse and an epiphany. They beckoned a technician. "Cross-correlate the volatile signature with Ervik den resin." Now. The cubs burrowed deeper into my coat. I thought of every awkward job I'd taken to pay for grad school, dog walking, cat sitting, and how those had auditioned me for this exact moment. Be calm, be warm, be furniture. One keeper, Ren, shifted. "We have the blessing at dusk. The cubs must be presented at the circle. If they cannot tolerate Sarn proximity, they tolerate human Mara," another keeper said. "Perhaps human Mara will carry them." The blessing, a ring of elders under a greenhouse canopy, each offering a low thrumming song as the cubs chose a central cushion and inhaled the village's scent. It mattered politically, and to the cubs' young nervous systems. Miss it, and sleep disorders and startle loops could hardwire into adulthood. We called that trauma on Earth. The Sarn called it a curse that echoes. "How far is the circle?" I asked. "4 corridors and 2 lifts," KSCL said, studying me like a fire door you're not sure is rated. "The space is restricted to Sarn elders and caretakers." "And cubs," I said. "The cubs have very specific opinions, apparently." A tech jogged up. "Chief, the coffee shares 2 volatiles with den resin, 2 furan methanol and—" KSCL cut them off. "The nursery banned coffee vapors 3 weeks ago. From Sarn areas," the tech said. "Not from the human galley." Which was where I ate. I had walked straight from lunch to the demo, trailing a molecular comfort blanket behind me. KSEL made the face elders make when the universe insists on being ridiculous. So the cubs associate the human with safety because she smells like our dens. Like home, I said softly. Ren glanced at the gallery, then back at me. Home must attend the blessing. My mouth went dry. Me? In the circle? I'm just a visiting researcher. You are also a vector for calm, KSEL said. If the Protectorate witnesses a successful blessing, they will sign the guarantees. If they do not, they let the silence finish it. The smallest cub climbed my chest and pressed its forehead to my jaw, a gesture so universal my caution unspooled. Then we go now, I said. The keepers rearranged into a protective diamond. KSEL walked slightly behind and to my left, murmuring into their cuff about permissions. The nursery doors recognized the Guardian protocol and unsealed, spraying a vanishing mist that neutralized scents inconsistent with circle sanctity. It did nothing to the coffee on my breath. The cubs sighed in a chorus, like 3 furnaces blooming. In the corridor, non-essential personnel flattened to the walls. Overhead, skylights shifted from blue to gold, simulating late afternoon. The cub's eyes, milky with youth, widened at the honeyed light. We reached the lift, descended, and when the doors opened a gust of damp, green air rolled in, soil, sap, something floral that didn't exist on any of our worlds. The circle lay ahead, beyond a living arch of braided vines and lantern moss. I heard the elders already, voices below speech, a harmonic scaffold that made the hair on my arms lift. The cubs lifted their noses and clicked. Ren halted us at the threshold. Protocol, they murmured to KSEL. Humans do not enter. Today, protocol bends, KSEL said. They looked to me. You may sit on the perimeter cushion and do only what the cubs require. A figure detached from the shadows, Grandma Raivesh, scars catalogued in treaties and poems. They tilted their head, studying our procession, a human den with 3 moons, a ring of antlers, an elder's worry. Humans do not enter the circle, Vesh said, ritual and warning intertwined. Honored Vesh, KSEL replied, bowing until their crest brushed the floor. We face a paradox. The cubs will not accept our nearness without panic. They accept the human as den. If we deny the human entry, we deny the blessing. Vesh's gaze slid to the cubs. They peeped, then pressed in tighter, which was both argument and plea. The elder's scars softened into something I had seen on grandparents' faces in Earth parks. Step forward, human, Vesh said. My knees tried to be opinions. I stepped through the arch. The greenhouse diffused the gold light into something warm and fall-like. Moss glowed underfoot. The elder's cushions formed a ring around a central bolster where the cubs were meant to nap while songs braided over them like weather. Sit, Vesh said, indicating a cushion on the perimeter. Do not speak unless the young require it. I lowered myself, palms open on my knees, and let the cubs decide. One by one, they unhooked, toddled to the center, and collapsed in a heap so dramatically trusting that I had to look away. The elders began to hum. It wasn't quite music, it was resonance, a lattice for new nervous systems to build on. The air tasted like damp stone and something sweet. KSEL's cuff chimed with messages from the gallery. Observers were watching, guarantees hung by a thread. Do not, under any circumstances, let the cubs wake screaming. The smallest cub lifted its head, blinked at me, and then, very deliberately, scooted until its flank touched the edge of my shoe. The elder's song shifted subtly to welcome. Ren's shoulders dropped a fraction. KSEL's crest smoothed. Beyond the arch, the corridor's polished floor reflected violet emergency lines marking evacuation routes. Just part of the station's safety overlay, I told myself, even as a prickle ran up my neck, as if the nursery had a heartbeat I had only now learned to hear. Vesh's bells chimed once, light as glass on cloth. We will proceed, they said. Human Mara, you will remain until the blessing completes. I have nowhere else I'd rather be, I said, and the cub by my shoe exhaled a small, satisfied hiss that sounded a lot like yes. I hoped the universe agreed. Outside the glass, the stars waited without comment tonight. The whisper wasn't from an elder, it came from the sanctity vents, a thin, cold draw that lifted fur along 3 small spines and made the lantern moss shiver. The circle's hourly purge had begun, the cycle meant to strip stray volatiles so only ritual, soil, and moss remained. Perfect for hymns, disastrous for biology. I felt it leach the coffee halo from my skin. At my shoe, the smallest cub flinched as if an invisible hand tugged whiskers, then pressed into the leather and breathed fast puffs. Across the ring, elders held their notes, eyes unflickering. KSEL's crest tightened. Vesh's bells were still. The purge would drink the scent these cubs had decided was home, and if home vanished now, fear would arrive like weather. KSEL's crest flattened into a blade. Stopping the purge would splash alerts across the greenhouse, an alarmed sheer ritual the way wind tears a web. Vesh's bells touched once, the ceremonial equivalent of a raised eyebrow that meant hold. The elder's cord steadied like a hand. I kept mine open on my knees and counted breaths. The smallest cub lifted its head, blinked milk-pale eyes at me, and made the soft, cracked squeak that says I have a question and I am small. I wasn't allowed to speak unless the cubs required it. The squeak counted. With me, I breathed, pitching my voice to sit under the elder's resonance instead of slicing across it. My breath carried coffee. The cub softened. The purge continued indifferent. Options inventory, a lint colony, a lab pass, medical tape, a cotton coat, and body heat. Creativity is panic with manners. I shrugged out of the coat, folded it twice, and draped it around the central bolster like a small, incomplete wall, leaving a hand-wide gap so the cubs could still see me. Cotton holds scent if warmed. Mine had been pressed to a human for hours. The cubs' noses rotated toward the cloth as if it were whispering a bedtime story. Vesh's eyes narrowed, but they did not lift a bell. I slid my palms over the fabric, released coffee. The purge hissed on, starving the air, but the wall bought time. In the gallery, I imagined a diplomat writing human fabric in notes. KSEL crouched at the perimeter, careful not to let antlers cross the invisible ritual line. They angled their cuffs so only I could see tiny script, humidity up? I breathed yes. A tech at the arch lifted the greenhouse a half degree and a whisper more. The moss brightened, the air softened, and scent stopped falling like stunned birds. Then a maintenance drone, silver and oblivious, sipped through with a neutralizer nozzle extended. Wren moved like a sprung trap, pinning it to the moss and clicking a shock wand against its casing. The pop cracked like a dropped tray, sharp and rude. The cubs twitched. I sank into my chest and hummed the floor under the elder's cord, a low human freight note steadying small muscles. A hollow note budded above Vesh's cushion, light dimmed to candles so the blessing wouldn't tear. The Protectorate's envoy resolved, mediator Hackle, for salted with winters, gaze polished for wars that preferred silk. Honored circle, he said, bowing just enough to be polite and not enough to be humble. The Protectorate observes a human within the sanctified ring. Vesh did not glance at me. Necessity reshapes custom. Hackle's eyes were coins, bright and hard. Convenience often wears necessity's mask. If the human's presence imprints an association that excludes Sarn caretaking, your ceremony confirms our worst fears. KSEL's crest flickered. Without her, panic prevented beginning. Hackle folded his hands. We accept evidence by the cycle's end, Sarn near the young while calm endures. Treaties hung by breath. Truth, the coat would cool and coffee would fade. We needed a bridge that was not only me. I set 2 fingers to my throat as a question. Vesh's gaze met mine and gave the smallest nod, a blessing smuggled across custom. I deepened the hum. Years of singing found the fundamental. The elders opened their cord to make a bed for it, resonance turning into scaffolding. Wren took one careful step toward the bolster, then another. An ear flicked, then stilled. KSEL mirrored from the opposite side, crest lowered to non-threat. 2 Sarn scents crept into warmed air beside sleeping flanks. The cubs breathed without panic. Hackle's image tilted, diplomat for surprised. Progress arrived like a front, promising rain and carrying seeds of trouble. Progress invited the next difficulty. The greenhouse's diurnal system, on a schedule no one had thought to override in the rush to begin, started exhaling evening fog. It slid under the arch in cool strands, beautiful and ruinous. Fog eats scent. Fog swallows songs and makes small animals feel the universe larger than their lungs. No one could hard stop it without alarms. I rubbed heat into the folded coat like a camper begging stubborn kindling. Warm air lifted coffee back into the gap. The cubs' whiskers stilled, their paws flexed into dream. KSCL eased closer, crest lowered. Hackle's image tilted. "We concede the human's role," he said. "Concede more by withdrawing her voice before the cycle ends." Vesh inclined head. "We would make physics help." Outside the glass, a skiff arrived too fast, its correction jets sibilant with apologies the hull couldn't keep. It kissed a support strut, and the greenhouse answered with a struck-bowl note that walked across the floor. One cub snapped upright, eyes full of the ancestral certainty that floors should not move. Every elder froze, ritual discipline distilled into stillness. "I will not startle with you." I extended 2 fingers into the coat's gap, a small forehead pressed into them like I had offered an answer. The elders drew the metallic note into their cord until it belonged there. The skiff settled. The cub slumped, paws twitching into dream. My hum became a thread, then a whisper, and still the circle held by physics and love. KSL's cuff blinked. 5 minutes to turn. Vesh glanced and returned their eyes to the sleepers. I dimmed my hum by a hair. The elders lifted, filling the space I left as if they had rehearsed this with humans for years instead of minutes. Ren and KSEL closed the last half-step, standing within the radius that had made the cubs scream for weeks. This time, a twitch, a sigh, no panic. Hackle's gaze narrowed, then warmed by half a degree, an envoy filing a new line under concessions possible. We were balancing on edges the width of hair together. Beyond the arch, the corridor's violet emergency lines brightened. A junior keeper slid to the threshold, bowed until antlers scraped moss, then waited patiently to speak. 2 words landed like cold water: deep cleanse. The corridor sanitizers had tagged coffee as foreign and rerouted the most thorough cycle they could imagine toward our greenhouse in exactly 2 minutes. Hungry fans, neutralizer vapor, the air stripped to bone. The cubs would wake strangled by absence, and the blessings map would harden around fear. Vesh did not look at me. KSEL did, because science is the art of finding levers fast. Ren's hand twitched toward his wand as if he could threaten air. Hackle's hologram went still, all instinct and calculus. We couldn't override without alarms. We couldn't finish before the cleanse. 2 minutes is forever with a plan. It is a blink without one. I counted heartbeats into pieces I could use. You don't fight a storm by shouting at it. You change what the storm thinks you are. How? KSEL whispered, crest trembling, and that sounded like permission disguised as despair. I slid my palms along the coat and felt heat gathering like a promise I could pour. We move the coffee, I said, mouth barely shaping it. Into the cloth. And into me. If the neutralizers sampled air and found the target bound to surfaces and bodies, the system might stand down without declaring victory. Vesh's bells chimed, 1 note, sanction stitched to warning. The elders did not falter. Fog licked the coat's edge like curious fingers. Outside, a tech's hands flew across a console. We would buy seconds, then try to turn them into shelter. KSEL's cuff flashed a time I didn't want to see. Somewhere deeper in the station, fans spooled with the certainty of systems that do not love anyone. I filled my lungs, found the circle's floor again, and set my voice there like a plank across a fast river. With my free hand I tore a strip from the coat's inner seam, twisted it to raise heat, and tucked it beneath my collar so it would wick scent toward mouth and skin. I nodded to KSEL, now, and watched them tip humidity a whisper. Ren advanced a half-step, antlers brushing moss. Hackle's image didn't blink. Vesh's bells were still. The cub at my shoe breathed, trusting. The first breath of the deep cleanse kissed the arch, and began. The deep cleanse arrived not as a gust but as a slow, deliberate hunger, tasting the air molecule by molecule. It slid into the greenhouse, curling along the moss like a polite intruder. The cub pressed harder against my boot, nostrils flaring, then whined, a thin sound, sharp enough to pierce the elder's cord. Vesh's bells gave a single chime, brittle as ice. The elders didn't stop singing, but I could feel the resonance thinning under the clean's pull. The air smelled wrong, empty in the way a hospital corridor smells empty, stripped of the things that remind living creatures they belong. Hold them! KSCL mouthed from the perimeter, eyes fixed on me. I didn't move my hand yet. Timing mattered. If I reacted too soon, the cubs would read my urgency as alarm. The cleanse was a system. Systems don't think, but they respond to conditions. My coat and skin were saturated with the only scent the cubs trusted, and the fans would register that scent in every cubic centimeter of air unless I could make them believe the job was already done. I eased the coat off the bolster and folded it into a tighter bundle, concentrating the coffee and cotton into a smaller footprint. My body heat kept pumping into it, turning the fabric into a stubborn little weather system. Then I held it high enough for the intake vents above me to sample. The change was subtle, a fractional dip in suction, a recalibration in the fan's pitch. The system thought it was winning. But the cubs weren't fooled yet. The smallest one had climbed back onto my shoe, trembling. Fog from the diurnal system still drifted through the circle, cutting the line of sight between me and the other two. That separation was the real danger. Cubs in the wild survived by staying in physical contact. If they lost each other in this whiteout, panic would cascade. I slid to my knees, coat still raised, and whistled softly, a sound pitched between the elder's low chord and the high keening call I'd heard from cubs in play. The one by my foot stilled. A chirp answered from somewhere inside the fog. A moment later, a dark blur emerged, brushing my other knee. 2 down. The last cub was still out there. Ren took a half step forward, then stopped at Vesh's sharp glance. We were already past the acceptable limits of protocol. If this failed, Hackle's protectorate would have every excuse to claim the blessing was invalid. I flattened the coat against the moss, rubbing it until warmth and scent pooled like liquid. Then I left my knees and hands on it, turning my whole body into an anchor of smell and presence. The fog shifted, a small shape stumbling into view. The elder's song caught that moment, folding around it like a net. All 3 cubs pressed in now, their combined weight absurd for creatures so young. My heartbeat was loud enough to feel in my teeth, but I kept still, letting their breathing sync with mine. KSEL tapped their cuff. 2 minutes left in the ritual cycle. The cleanse would finish before then, but if the cubs broke now, the final evaluation would fail. That was when the Protectorate envoy spoke again, voice smooth but edged. A fragile calm. Will it hold without the human? Every elder looked at Vesh. The Grammatry's gaze rested on me for a long breath, then they said, We will see. The test was clear: remove me, prove the cubs could tolerate Sarn presence without me in the circle. And if they couldn't, everything we'd balanced so far would collapse. KSEL's eyes met mine. We can't refuse. I slid my hands away from the cubs, then began to rise, slow enough for them to think it was their idea to stay put. My coat stayed beneath them. 1 step back. 2. The cubs churred, shifting, but didn't bolt. Ren and KSEL moved in, their presence now the closest thing to home in the room. The elders adjusted their chord, weaving in overtones that mimicked the resonance of my hum. The envoy watched in perfect stillness. I reached the perimeter and stopped, every nerve screaming to turn around. The cubs were still there, leaning against Sarn legs instead of mine. It wasn't perfect trust, but it was enough. Hackle inclined his head, just slightly. The cleanse ended with a sigh from the vents. And for the first time since this began, I believed we might actually finish the blessing. That's when the glass wall behind the elders shuddered, not from a skiff this time, but from something much heavier docking without clearance. The moss trembled. The cubs froze. And I realized our hardest moment hadn't come yet. The sound was wrong for any scheduled arrival, too deep, too deliberate. It thudded through the greenhouse frame like a heartbeat from somewhere larger than the station. Elders broke chord in the same breath, The sudden silence was a hole the size of the sky. Ren's shock wand was already in his hand. KSEL's cuff bloomed with red glyphs, an flight plan. Unknown dock. The cubs huddled so tight against the nearest sarn legs that their claws snagged ceremonial scarves. The Protectorate envoy's image flared with static, then sharpened. "Honored Circle," Hackle said, but his voice was clipped, less diplomacy, more command. "That is not one of ours. I advise immediate dispersal." Vesh's bells rang 3 sharp notes, sealed the circle. The archway vines braided shut, lantern moss dimming to a defensive blue. My throat went tight. The cubs were inside. I was outside the ring. Protocol again, walls again. A hiss like tearing cloth rolled down the corridor, followed by the soft, distinct thunk of something attaching itself to the greenhouse's outer hatch. I'd seen boarding clamps before, in bids that always ended with ransom demands. The elders shifted without panic but with precision, placing themselves between the cubs and the wall. KSCL moved to the arch, crest low, voice pitched for me alone. "Human Mara, if they are after the cubs, your scent will draw them. You must get them out," I finished. My scent was the cubs' anchor. If they panicked in an evacuation tunnel, that anchor might be the only thing keeping them moving instead of freezing. Vesh's gaze flicked to me, weighing breaches against survival. The bells chimed once. Permission. The vines of the arch uncoiled just enough for me to slip inside. The cubs caught sight of me and bolted straight into my knees, as if the world had remembered to put its floor back. One was already trembling in that high, rigid way animals get before they bolt in the wrong direction. "Ren, rear flank," Vesh ordered. "KSEL, seal the second lift behind them." The docking clamp thudded again, harder this time, and a scene in the outer hatch began to glow under stress. Whoever was outside wasn't here for tea. I scooped the smallest cub into my coat, tucking it where my body heat and scent could wrap it completely. The other 2 pressed so close to my shins I could feel their hearts in my bones. "With me," I murmured, and their ears twitched at the same pitch I'd used in the fog earlier. We moved. The elders' voices rose behind us, not in blessing chord now but in something older, low, sharp harmonics designed to rattle the bones of predators. The sound made my teeth ache and the cubs flatten their ears, but it also kept their focus on me instead of the pounding behind the hatch. Ren herded us through the first corridor, KSCL already at the lift controls ahead. The emergency lines on the floor strobed violet, marking the fastest evacuation path. The cubs stayed glued to my legs, running in that low, bounding gait I'd seen on field cams of their wild kin. Behind us, the hatch finally gave, an awful metallic scream followed by boot falls far too heavy for station staff. Ren didn't look back. "Faster!" he snapped, not at me, but at the lift. We piled in, the doors sealing just as a shadow hit the far end of the corridor. The lift dropped, humming with effort, then opened into a service bay lined with utility carts, and, thank every engineer who'd ever loved redundancy, an unsealed maintenance skiff. KSEL was already at the controls, fingers flying. "No clearance needed on this model. It will read as an environmental drone." The cubs didn't care what it read as. They followed me up the ramp, one still tucked under my arm, the other scrambling into the hollow under the seat. I slid in after them, coat open enough to spill scent into the compartment. Ren took the gunner's couch, which I hoped we wouldn't need. The skiff launched like it had been waiting for the excuse. Through the viewport, the greenhouse dwindled, blue moss light winking behind sealed vines. I saw Vesh's silhouette against the arch, bells still and head high. KSEL aimed us into the station's outer maintenance ring, weaving through girders until the chaser, if there was one, would have to guess which of a dozen identical drones we were. The cub's breathing slowed, pressed against me in a knot of fur and trust. Hackle's voice crackled over KSEL's cuff. "The intruders are contained. No casualties. The blessing will reconvene in 2 cycles. The Protectorate will sign the guarantees." A pause then. "Ensure the human attends. The cubs will require consistency." Ren chuckled once, the sound surprising even him. "Consistency. That's one way to put it." KSEL glanced at me. You've become part of their map now. You can't just leave when your study ends. I looked down at the 3 pairs of half-lidded eyes, the smallest one's paw curled around my thumb like it had always been there. Wasn't planning to. The station's shadow rolled over us, and then we were in open black, stars crowding the viewport like curious onlookers. Somewhere back in the circle, the elders would resume their song, weaving my absence into something the cubs could live with. But here, in this cramped skiff smelling of coffee and fur, I could feel the weight of what we just carried through. Not just the cubs, but the thin, stubborn thread of trust between species that didn't owe each other anything, until now. One of the cubs yawned, a tiny sound lost in the hum of the engines. And for the first time all day, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe had decided we were on the same side after all.